The first night in the apartment, I dragged the couch to the middle of the room and slept there with my jacket over me. The place was cheap, and the windows didn't lock right. It used to be a bigger house, split into 3 units. You could see the seams where they'd put up new walls. The floor sloped a little toward the kitchen. The landlord, Frank, said it gave the place character. It made my coffee slide off the counter if I wasn't careful. I'd come back to town because I didn't have many choices left. My mother was gone, and the job in the city had ended with a phone call and a cleared desk. A friend said there was steady work at the county records office. I could move boxes, scan files, keep my head down. I told myself I was fine with that. The apartment was 5 streets from the office. Frank wanted cash on the first of the month. He was one of those men who smiled with his mouth, but not with his eyes. He wore a chain outside his shirt and had a stomach that led the way into rooms. When I asked why the rent was so low for a place with a small yard and a garage, he said, "Market's soft," and changed the subject. It wasn't until later that I learned the house had another reason. My first week there, I started waking up with the feeling that someone had just left the room. Not the feeling of being watched. The opposite. Like a presence had been there a moment ago and slipped out the door. I'd lie there on the couch staring at the ceiling, listening to the refrigerator buzz and the traffic on the street, and I'd think I heard footsteps in the hall. Not heavy, bare feet, weight on the front of the step. I'd get up and check. The hall was empty. The bathroom door stood open. My toothbrush was in the same cup, the towel still damp from my shower. I told myself it was the people in the other units. At the office, I kept my head down like I promised myself. They put me in the basement with the scanners and the boxes and a radio that worked sometimes. The basement had a smell of paper and old coffee. The walls were painted a color I couldn't name, something like wet cardboard. If I taped a pen to the side of the scanner to keep the lid from slamming, no one noticed. My supervisor, a woman named Ortega, told me to focus on case files from the late 90s. "We're digitizing the backlog," she said. "Some of these never made it past paper. Don't worry about the content. Just scan, log, and shelve." I didn't worry about the content. Not at first. But the files didn't sit still in my head after I closed them. They leaked details. A name, an address, a face captured in a photocopied driver's license. There was one folder that stuck like a splinter. It was labeled in black marker. Crawford House. Homicides. Unsolved. I didn't know the nickname until I read it. Crawford House. People in town had other names for it. The Butcher's Walk. The 4 rooms. The address on the folder matched the one on the mailbox in front of my apartment. I scanned the paperwork with my hands steady and my breath shallow, like a nurse putting in a needle. There were photos in the file. Low resolution, grainy prints from a point-and-shoot camera. The dates were from a summer when I was a kid. The photos showed the house and the yard and the inside of what had been the main unit. In the living room, the carpet had been cut away in a rectangle. In the corner of the kitchen, the baseboard was missing, and the drywall was wet. There were photos of the bodies, too. 4 of them. 2 men, 1 woman, 1 boy. The boy was maybe 12. Someone had placed a washcloth over the boy's face, but it had slipped. Each of them had the same mutilation at the neck. Not a clean cut. A tearing. The text in the report called it degloving of soft tissue. I put the photos down and stared at the floor until the cement took shape again. The opening page said a woman named Mara was missing and presumed dead. She had rented the largest unit in the house with her son for 3 months. She worked nights at the gas station off 9th. The report said she'd argued with a boyfriend. There were notes in the margins, different inks, different hands. Domestic. Drugs. No sign of forced entry. The landlord says blah blah. The words stacked up over years, and then the writing stopped. No arrests. No trial. The case drifted into the basement to wait its turn to be digitized. I didn't read all of it. I told myself I didn't have time. I told myself it didn't matter anymore. But I kept the address in my head and didn't need to keep it there because I walked through it every night when I went home. Frank would be outside smoking. He'd wave with the hand that held the cigarette and ask, "How's the paper pushing?" I'd say, "Fine," and go upstairs. If I stopped for the mail, I could see into his unit through the screen door. There were photos of kids on the wall. None of them looked like him. A TV sat on a stand too small for it. He kept the blinds down all day. The air inside always looked yellow. On a Thursday evening, I was passing his door when he called out, "Hey, Dan." I don't know why he called me Dan. I hadn't told him to. He lifted his chin and showed me the inside of his hand. There was a cut across the palm. It was fresh and deep, a smile of meat and blood. He said, "You got any bandages up there?" I went back to my unit and rummaged. I had a box of gauze and a roll of tape. When I came back down, he had the screen door propped open. The TV was on with the sound off. A woman pointed at a graphic of a storm as if that could stop it. He held his hand over a bowl. The bowl was full of water the color of tea. "Cut it on a jar," he said. He looked at me like we were sharing a joke. I had some stuff stacked. Should have known better. He let me tape his hand. His palm was warm and tough like the sole of a foot. He had lines in his skin that made his hand look like a map. He flinched when I pressed the gauze, and then he looked right in my face and said, "You sleep all right up there?" I should have said yes. I should have shrugged it off. I said, "Sometimes I wake up." "Yeah," he said, nodding as if I had told him something he already knew. "Old house." He glanced at the TV, then back at me. "Lot of stories in these walls." He didn't say which stories. He didn't have to. I went back upstairs and stood at the sink and looked at my face in the dark window. I waited to see if my reflection would move on its own. It didn't. Behind me, something brushed the doorway. I spun around and there was nothing there but the shape of the door and the air moving because my breath had moved it. It was stupid to talk to it, but I did. "Do you have a name?" I asked the empty space. Nothing. I was alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of a car passing outside. Then, without thinking about it, I said, "Mara." The way the air shifted felt like a person had stepped closer and then held still. That night I slept in my bed for the first time since I moved in. I woke up with the sense that the mattress had lifted slightly and settled again. Not like a cat jumping down. Like a person sitting beside me, then standing up. I didn't open my eyes. I listened to the soft sound of the hall floor. It curved away toward the bathroom. The footsteps stopped at the front door. The latch made a tiny sound. Then nothing. I got up and checked the chain. It was still set. The door was closed. My keys were on the hook where I'd left them. My phone was on the floor where I'd knocked it while I slept. I told myself I was tired and made coffee and went to work. In the basement, the scanner lid dropped and I jumped hard enough to bite my tongue on both sides. When I took the Crawford House file back to its shelf, I didn't put it where it belonged. I kept it on my desk and told myself it was easier that way. I kept turning the pages and looking at small details. There were 2 autopsy reports with the same language in them, as if they'd been copied from one template. All 4 victims had their throats mutilated. The cuts were ugly and shallow, like a person had sawed and leaned and sawed again. There were bruises on wrists. There were fibers found on a duvet cover in the main bedroom. The report said the fibers matched a blue polyester jacket. In one of the crime scene photos, the jacket hung on a hook by the front door, like someone had set it there before stepping out to get the mail. I was memorizing the jacket when Ortega came to the door of the basement and said my name. I covered the photos with a manila folder like a teenager caught with a magazine. "You all right down here?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Good pace," she said, nodding at the stacks of scanned boxes. "I'm sending you another card after lunch." I wanted to ask her if she remembered the murders. She'd have been a kid herself then. I wanted to ask if everyone in town had felt the shock at the time, or if it was just a dark rumor that slid under doors. I said none of that. She left. The radio gave a static sigh and went silent again. That afternoon, a man came down the stairs with a box on a dolly. He was short and tight, like a wrestler whose muscles had settled into their shape. He wore a jacket with the county logo and a shaved head that reflected the fluorescent light. "Delivery," he said, rolling the dolly to my station. He glanced at the open folder before I could close it. His eyes slowed. He looked at the photo with the jacket on the hook, then at me. "Where'd you get that one?" he asked. "Backlog," I said. My mouth was dry. "Huh," he said. He leaned in without touching the paper. His breath smelled like coffee and something sweet. He said, "You live out that way, don't you?" I nodded before I remembered I didn't need to tell him anything. "Frank still got his hooks in that place?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He nodded like that fit a pattern he liked. He stuck out his hand. "I'm Burke. Evidence room." We shook. His palm was dry and hard. He glanced at the picture again and said, "We never found her. The woman. Shame." "Mara," I said. He watched my mouth when I said her name, like he wanted to see how it sat there. He said, "People do bad things and sleep fine after. You know that?" "I guess." He left. The folder on my desk looked heavier than before. That night, I walked past Frank's door and saw the blue jacket in the photo in my mind. Pilled polyester, zip broken at the bottom, a stain near the left cuff. I didn't want to go inside my unit. I wanted to keep moving until my legs gave out. But I did go in. I made rice. I ate it standing at the counter. I washed the bowl. I turned in a slow circle to see if the room had changed when I wasn't looking. My eyes stopped at the hall. The hall was the same. The light was the same. Then something breathed in once, and the hairs on my arms lifted. "I can see you're not finished," I said. I didn't know where that sentence came from. It just formed. It was true the second I said it. The cold moved past me and into the kitchen. The refrigerator clicked like a throat and started buzzing again. I felt a pressure in my own throat. like my shirt collar had shrunk. I reached up and tugged, and my fingers came away wet. I looked at them. There was a thin line of red on my fingertips. I walked to the bathroom and turned on the light. The bulb hummed. The mirror showed a smear on my neck. Not a cut. More like someone had touched me with greasy hands and left a stripe. It looked like the shape of 2 fingers and a thumb. I stood there too long. The light made my eyes dry. I washed the smear away and watched the water in the sink turn pink and then clear. When I looked up at the mirror again, a woman stood behind me. I didn't turn around. The mirror had her at an angle. She was small, and she had her hair pulled back hard. Her mouth was a straight line. I could see the bones in her shoulders. She wore a t-shirt stretched thin from many washes. A tattoo peeked out from the sleeve, the dark tail of a letter. She had the kind of eyes that look like they are always calculating. She didn't open her mouth. She looked at my neck, and then at my face, and then at her own hands as if seeing them again. "Okay," I said. Not softly, not loudly. "Okay." She lifted her right hand and put her fingers on the place where my neck met my shoulder, the spot that always goes stiff when I work too long at a desk. Her fingers were cold, but not like metal, like river water in spring. I felt the pressure deepen, then lift. When I turned around, the bathroom was empty. The light hummed. The air felt used. I laughed once, a hard single note that had nothing happy in it. After that, she didn't come every night. She came when she wanted. I didn't control it, and I didn't pretend to. I tried to keep my life on rails. I went to the office. I scanned boxes. I didn't talk to Burke or Ortega about anything except the job. But I started bringing the Crawford House file home in my bag. I told myself I didn't want it to get misfiled. I told myself I needed to compare the scanner's resolution with my home printer's. I printed the jacket photo and taped it inside my pantry door. I wrote down the names of the dead and said them before I slept. I said Mara's name last, and I waited. When she was with me, I learned the logic of her presence. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. If I asked a question and it was the wrong one, the room got colder and the lights dimmed a fraction, as if the house itself hated my line of thought. If I asked the right question, the pressure eased. If I said a name that mattered, the floor felt level for a moment. The first time she moved something, it was a small thing. The TV remote slid across the coffee table and tapped my hand. I'd been watching a crime show with the sound down and the captions on. I was reading words an actor said to another actor about honor and evidence. The remote touched me and I picked it up and turned the TV off. She let the quiet settle. "Do you want me to do something?" I asked. "Or do you want me to know something?" The remote slid again, an inch. I had the sense of a head-shaking no. My mind filled in her face, the hard mouth, the calculating eyes. She wanted action. "Who?" I asked. The room stayed steady. Wanting something isn't the same as saying it. I waited. I put a pen and paper on the table. I wrote, "Who?" I wrote, "Why?" I wrote, "Where?" I printed the words like a schoolboy. She read my hand and she moved the pen. It didn't lift. It slid. The tip made a scuffing sound. I watched it draw a line from who to where. Then the pen stopped. "Where first?" I said. The lights dimmed and brightened, not a blink, just a slow change like a cloud passing the sun. My scalp prickled. "Where?" I asked. She bumped my shoulder. I stood. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I put my hand out and she didn't take it, but she did guide me. Into the hall, past the bathroom, past the closet, to the front door. My mouth went dry because I understood what she wanted before I wanted to understand it. I opened the door, and the night smelled like rain, though the street was dry. The stairs creaked under my feet. The grass in the yard was short and silver in the porch light. I went down the walk to the sidewalk. I looked left. I looked right. She pushed me right. We walked 2 blocks that way, then turned. She didn't steer with force. It wasn't a push. It was the same feeling I'd had in bed the first night, like a presence sitting next to me and then standing up, like heat moving through the room, like someone exhaling and me catching their breath and keeping it. We crossed at the corner and went down the alley behind the gas station. The light over the back door buzzed and flickered and stayed on. The handle was taped where it had cracked. I reached out and touched it. The cold in my shoulder became a steady ache. I let my hand fall. "You worked here," I said. "Before." The ache sharpened. I stepped back. The door was locked. I didn't try to open it. We stood there a long minute. I heard the hum of coolers inside, the chime of the front door. A voice laughed. The laugh had a mean edge. The ache in my shoulder moved up into my jaw. My teeth pressed. I swallowed and said, "Not here. Somewhere else." The ache eased by a hair. I walked to the end of the alley and stood where it opened onto 9th. I looked across the street at the pawn shop, then at the shuttered storefront next to it, the one with the faded sign that read Joe's TV. The ache drifted like a hand considering where to land. I crossed to Joe's TV. I cupped my hands to the window and peered inside. Dust. A fallen poster of a man smiling at a VCR. The ache didn't change. We went on. We turned down Oak. The houses leaned toward each other like they had something to say and no one else was listening. A dog barked behind a fence and then decided we didn't matter and stopped. We walked another block. I knew where we were going before we got there. My feet did anyway. They went steady. The ache sharpened and then dropped away as if we had crossed through an invisible string. We stood at the gate to a yard I knew. The gate latch was rusted. The fence was new, though. Someone had fixed it recently. The porch light was on and a wind chime clicked against itself, talking nonsense. The house belonged to a man named Avery, who worked nights at the mill and kept 2 trucks in the driveway, one for show and one he actually used. I knew Avery because he'd asked me one day if I wanted to make some extra cash moving a freezer from his garage to his shed. He'd paid me $20 in a 6-pack and then told me the freezer hadn't worked in years. He seemed like the type who liked to keep broken things close. Maybe it made him feel better to walk past them. The ache in my shoulder was gone. The air around me had that tight feel of a school gym right before a game. I stood at the gate and my brain had a simple thought that took over the others. Go in. I lifted the latch. It squealed. I froze. I listened. Inside the house, a TV laughed. The laugh track forgot why it existed and went on too long. I walked to the back. The garage door was cracked. I got my fingers under it and lifted slow. The door jerked and rattled and stayed up. The garage smelled like oil, cardboard, and something else I didn't name. The light bulb in the socket didn't work. I kept my phone in my pocket. I didn't want the light. The freezer was there where I had left it when I helped him move it. The lid had a strap around it now, a ratchet strap you'd use to tie plywood to a roof. There was dust on the lid except where fingers had brushed it. I reached for the strap, and the air went cold enough to make my gums ache. She was close. I undid the ratchet and let the strap fall. The metal gave a soft clack against the concrete. I put both hands under the lip and lifted the lid. There was a breathing mask inside, one of those clear plastic ones with a long tube. There were lengths of rope. There were knives wrapped in towels gone dark with old use. There were photos. I could see the corners, the white borders. Something moved under the photos and my mind tried to make a mouse out of it. It wasn't a mouse. It was something like a finger that had been left behind. I shut the lid and leaned on it until my arms shook. I didn't want to do it. I did it anyway. I opened the lid again and reached for the stack of photos and took them with both hands and held them under the light that didn't work. I could still see. It was amazing what your eyes would do for you when you asked. The first photo was a woman on her knees with a bag over her head. The second was a man in a chair with his wrists tied, slumped and mouth open, neck wet and flayed. The third was a boy. Not the same boy from the Crawford House photos. Another one. The boy had blood in his hair and tape on his mouth. There were more. I put them down because my fingers couldn't hold any more. I could have walked away. I could have called someone. I didn't do either of those things. I don't have a clean excuse. I can tell you I felt like I was in a room with a person who was about to say something that mattered, and if I left, they'd stop and never speak again. I can tell you the air around me had a weight to it that kept my feet where they were. I can tell you that when I let the lid fall, it whispered, and the whisper was a name that I didn't know until the sound was in my ear. Avery. The back door of the house opened. I stood with my hands limp at my sides and the photos at my feet and the strap on the floor, and I watched a rectangle of light fall across the lawn. "Who's there?" Avery said. No joke. He said that. The line cops say in shows, and men say in empty rooms when they should keep their mouths shut. He had a beer bottle in his hand, and he wore the expression of a man who thinks the world is minor, and he is major. He clicked a flashlight. The light found the freezer and moved over it, and then found me and sat on my chest. "Hey," he said, as if I were a friend who had let himself in. He squinted with the light. "You," he said, "from the thing, with the freezer." "I needed to talk to you," I said. My voice belonged to the wrong person. It sounded like a throat that had spent a long time whispering. He looked at the lid. He saw the dust disturbed. He saw the strap on the floor. Something moved under the skin of his face. He set the beer on the workbench without looking. He took a step toward me and then another, and the flashlight dropped from my chest to my feet, and then to the floor where it rolled and threw wild light across the wall. He grabbed my shirt at the neck with both hands. "What did you see?" he asked. His breath smelled like metal. I told the truth. "Enough," I said. He looked at my neck where his hands had bunched my collar. His thumb pressed on the place where Mara had touched me. He squeezed hard. My vision narrowed. The cold I had felt before, the river water cold, moved over my skin like a hand had decided I was worth touching again. I heard a sound in the room that I didn't make. It was small and low, like a person had said no in a way that meant the opposite. Avery's face changed. He looked behind me. He saw nothing. because that's what there was to see. He laughed once. That same mean laugh I'd heard through the alley door. He said, "You want to know things, do you?" He squeezed harder. I don't remember making the decision. My hand found the ratchet strap on the floor and came up with the metal end in my palm. I swung it up and in. It connected with something that gave. He let go and staggered back, and I brought my hand down again, and the metal bit his temple, and he made a sound like a person who had been surprised in the worst way. He fell to his knees. I stood there breathing the air out of my lungs in a steady stream like if I stopped I'd drown. He crawled. His hand reached the flashlight and then missed it. He put his palm down in the strap and looked up at me as if I were a hitch in his day. I was. He didn't see Mara. He wouldn't have known her if he had. I did. She was there, not in the light, not in the shadow, but in the usual air, wearing the world like a coat. She put her hands over mine on the strap, and we pulled it up and out. And he raised his arm to shield his head, and the strap cut through his forearm like a car window cutting a stick, and his arm went sideways and blood came out in 2 lines at once. I don't know if I should tell you the rest of this part. You asked me for the truth. I'm not going to skip the ugly parts and pretend it was all blackouts and mercy. He sat back against the freezer and put his stump against his shirt and tried to press, and his hand slipped and slipped, and he started to say a prayer he didn't know the words to. I knelt across his legs. The strap had teeth on one side. I put those teeth under his chin. He shook his head to say no, and a person who was still alive inside him tried to talk. I pulled and he kicked and I pulled, and the strap opened him the way the report had described. Not clean, not noble, not in the way a man wants to go. He looked at me like I owed him something, and he gurgled a syllable that might have been my name if it mattered then. When it was over, I sat on the floor and leaned my back against the freezer. The photos were at my feet. One stuck to the sole of my shoe. The flashlight had come to rest against a paint can and made a weird stage of the corner of the room. My hands were shaking so hard I had to put them between my knees to keep them still. The cold pressure on my shoulder softened. I felt a thumb brush my neck again. The same spot. I don't know if it was affection or thanks or habit. I should have run. Instead, I cleaned. I cleaned like I knew how, which is to say badly and too fast. I rolled him onto a tarp I found and dragged him to the pit in the yard where he'd been burning wood for months, though the ashes told a different story. I took the knives and the rope and the mask and the photos and stacked them in the garage like I would come back for them. I shut the lid of the freezer and strapped it again. The strap clicked the way a seatbelt does before a crash. I washed my hands with the hose until they were red and numb. I went back through the gate and out into the alley and kept walking until my legs told me to stop. Back at my apartment, I threw my clothes into a bag and tied it shut and set it by the door. I showered and watched the pink water again. I stood in the steam and said nothing. When I came out, she was in the living room. There was no shape to her, but I felt the same weight in the air as in the garage. I said, "Is that what you wanted?" The temperature in the room didn't change. The lights didn't flicker. She did something else instead. She let me remember a thing I hadn't known I remembered. It came into my head like a memory that belongs to someone else but uses your voice. I saw a child running through the yard in front of this house. The grass was higher then. The porch had a different rail. A woman stood on the steps with a smoke in her hand, hair back, mouth set, watching the child go where he wanted because he would come back. A man walked by on the sidewalk and didn't look up. His hands were in his pockets. He wore a hunter's cap and a blue jacket. The boy ran to the fence and back, a loop like a tick of a clock. The man didn't stop. The woman watched and flicked ash into the yard. The memory snapped shut. I stood alone in my living room with wet hair. I looked out the window at the street. Nothing moved except a plastic bag the wind had found. I wrote blue jacket on a sheet of paper and pinned it to the pantry with tape, and then I wrote hunter's cap under it. I wrote man didn't look up. I wrote why. I did not turn on the news. If there was a story in town about a body burning in a pit, it hadn't started yet. I lay on the couch with a towel under my head and watched the lines in the ceiling slowly shift as my eyes blurred. She sat beside me. I didn't see her sit. I felt the cushions take her weight. I wanted to sleep. She wouldn't let me. Every time I drifted, the cold at my neck would sharpen and I'd rise to the surface again. At dawn, if it was dawn, the room had that sick gray light old houses have when they know they'll have to do the day again. I made a pot of coffee and drank half and regretted it. I went to work. Ortega looked like she hadn't slept either. Burke wasn't around. I went to the basement and turned on the scanner and pulled out the Crawford House file and found the page with the list of names. 4 victims. The 2 men were listed as acquaintances of the landlord at the time. Not Frank. Another man. Frank had bought the property later. The woman was listed as a tenant with a different last name than her son, which isn't rare. The boy's name was listed under hers with the note, "No custody order on file." The report said there had been complaints from other tenants about noise. It said the landlord had visited the unit on the Thursday before the bodies were found. It said the police had canvassed, but no one had seen anything of note. I traced the landlord's name with my finger. I wrote it on a sticky note. I stuck it on the photo of the blue jacket. It looked wrong there, but I left it. I kept turning pages. There was a sheet of paper with a list of items in evidence that looked like it had been typed blindfolded. Money clips, letter opener, keys with a shark keychain, box of photographs, blue jacket, suspected. Suspected of what? The note didn't say. There was a signature at the bottom I couldn't read. Then there was a memo from a detective I'd never heard of recommending release of the property to next of kin, pending further investigation. There was a second memo stapled to it saying, "Hold until review." The staple had rusted and left an orange star. When I looked up, Burke was in the doorway. He leaned on the frame like he'd been there a while. "You look like shit," he said, in a voice that could have been a joke or not. "Late night," I said. "Paper will do that to you," he said. He stepped in and nodded at the Crawford House folder. "Can't let it go, can you?" "It's my job," I said. He snorted. "Sure it is." He came close and tapped the evidence list with a finger. "Half this stuff is gone." "Gone?" "Misplaced," he said, and he made a motion with his hand that meant lost, like you would lose a sock while you're wearing both socks. He leaned in and squinted at the signature. "You know whose that is?" He didn't wait for me to answer. "That's Greer. He took a powder 2 months later, retired to a lake or a ditch. Depends who you ask." "What about the box of photographs?" I asked. He tilted his head. You got a weird interest in boxes. What about them? I said. Gone, he said, as if that were the natural end to things. Maybe they never existed. Maybe someone typed them by mistake. Maybe they're sitting in a closet under someone's winter coat. He looked at me with eyes that were less sleepy than before. Why? I had a choice then. I could lie and say I was just curious. I could tell the truth and watch everything I am get weighed and found wanting. I said nothing. Silence told on me more than any words. He smiled without teeth. You know the house has history, he said. People still talk. Frank talks, I said. Frank's full of it, Burke said. Always has been. He stuck his hands in his jacket pockets and rocked back on his heels. You hear anything at night? Pipes, I said. Uh-huh, he said. Well, try not to hear too much. Town like this has soft ears. He tipped an imaginary cap and left. I sat and watched the radio glow without sound. I still had the ash stink in my nose. I breathed through my mouth and tasted metal. On my lunch break, I didn't eat. I walked to the courthouse and sat on the steps and watched people go in and out. I watched their hands. You can tell a lot from hands. You can tell age and work and patience. I watched for a blue jacket even though the weather was warm. I watched for a hunter's cap. I told myself I wanted justice. I told myself the word like a pill that dissolves slow and tastes bad. That evening I didn't go straight home. I walked past the house and kept going. I passed the bar with the sign that said cocktails and no other information. The door was open, and a piece of music came out, and then died. I passed the church with a notice board that said an event was happening Saturday, but not what. I found myself in front of a cement building with one window and a metal door, the evidence room. I hadn't planned to go there. My feet had planned it for me. The door was locked. I stood there with my hands in my pockets and tried not to look like a person about to do a thing he couldn't undo. Burke's truck wasn't out front. There was a buzzer. I pressed it. No one answered. I pressed it again and held it down for too long. The speaker made the sound of a person who doesn't want to clear their throat. Then the door opened from the inside, and an old man with a face like asphalt said, "Can I help you?" "I'm here for Ortega," I said, as if that were believable. "She's not here," he said. "You want to leave a message?" "No," I said. I didn't leave. He looked at me, then at the parking lot, then at me again. "You look like you got business," he said. "I need to see a file," I said. He shook his head like the answer had been decided last year, and this conversation was a formality. He started to close the door, but a shape appeared behind him. Burke. He had a paper cup in his hand. He said, "It's fine, Walt. He's with me." Walt looked at him the way a dog looks at a person who tells it the rules have changed in the middle of the game. He shrugged and let the door open wider. "Your circus," he said to Burke. To me, he said nothing. Inside, the air was cool and smelled like dust you weren't allowed to disturb. Burke walked me past shelves of boxes with numbers instead of names. He didn't ask me what I wanted. He went straight to a section labeled with years and pulled a box without looking at the labels. He set it on a table and opened it. Inside were plastic bags with artifacts wrapped in paper. He found one and held it up. The label said, "Crawford, textiles, blue jacket. My heart moved in a way that made me put my hand flat on the table to feel wood. Burke set the bag down. "You saw something," he said. "I didn't say that," I said. "You didn't need to," he said. He tore the bag open at the seal and took the jacket out without gloves. He shook it like a person angry at a towel. Fibers came off in the air and drifted. The jacket had a stain near the left cuff. He walked to a fluorescent light and held up the sleeve. "Hey," Walt said from the doorway. "Hey." Burke ignored him. He pinched the sleeve and looked close. He looked at me. "If we sent this to a lab now," he said, "they'd send it back with a bill and a note that says we're too late." He folded the sleeve back and laid the jacket on the table. "You want to tell me why you're here?" "I'm looking for a person," I said. "A ghost," he said. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The room got cold with the evenness of a person laying a sheet on a bed. Burke's face didn't show it. He said, "Thought so." He reached into the box and took out another bag. This one held a keychain with a shark on it. He set it on the table. He said, "Man named Avery kept coming down here back then. Said he found this in the yard. Wanted to know if it belonged to anyone official. He liked to be useful. You ever meet a man who likes to be useful?" I stared at the keychain. "Anyway," Burke said, "Greer logged it and then logged it out to himself. For a look, for a coffee, for a year. No one saw it again." He tapped the box. "Somebody stuck it back later. Not the jacket, though. The jacket wandered all over town. You know where I found it? Prop closet at the community theater. Some actor wore it in a play about a farm. Don't know who signed it out. Don't know who signed it back. Everybody wants a piece of something that touched violence." He stopped talking. The room let the quiet stretch. Walt coughed. The cough turned into a few more. He said, "I don't like jokes down here." "No jokes," Burke said. He looked at me. "You're going to keep going," he said. "I can see it. The thing is, once you start, the line gets blurry. You understand blurry lines?" "I do," I said, and my voice didn't crack. He put the jacket back in the bag and sealed it like he hadn't torn it. He slid it across the table to me. Walt made a sound, but Burke raised a hand and Walt didn't finish it. Burke said, "You never got this from me. If anyone asks, you'll say you didn't see me." He waited for me to nod. I did. He nodded back. He said, "If the dead want something, they don't stop asking." "I know," I said. "Do you?" he said. But he didn't wait for an answer. I took the bag with the jacket and walked out into air that felt like it had seen people come and go and didn't care either way. I went home with the jacket in my arms like a sick dog. In my living room, I laid it on the couch and sat on the floor. I said, "Is this something you need?" The air shifted. The cold touched the back of my neck. It was not yes and not no. It was more like, "Keep going." I stuck my hands in the pockets of the jacket. In the right pocket, I found a penny folded into a receipt from a hardware store. The ink had smeared. I could make out the word twine. In the left pocket, my fingers touched something hard and small. I pinched it and brought it out. It was a tooth. Human. The root was cracked. I put it on the table and looked at it and tried to feel like a person who hadn't already crossed a line so far back I couldn't see it. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the front door. I watched the hall. The house breathed the way it always did. She sat beside me for a while. At some point she got up without getting up, and the cushion rose. I thought of Avery's pit. I thought of what in town burns quiet. I thought of Frank and his yellow light. I thought of Burke and his careful face, and how much he knew and what he would do when the knowing touched his hands. I thought of a man in a hunter's cap who didn't look up. When the sky lightened, if it did, I took the jacket and the tooth, and I tucked them into a bag. I showered again and left, before Frank could be on his step with his cigarette. I turned left where I usually turned right. I walked toward the mill. The mill had a fence and a gate and a guard with a crossword. I wasn't going there. I went to the little street behind it where the trains switch. There's a lot you can do with a train that people won't notice until it's far away. I stood there with the bag and I made a decision that felt like breaking a bone. I didn't throw the bag. I didn't keep it. I turned around and walked back to the house. She was waiting. Not in a way you can point to. In the way the air held itself. I set the bag on the table. I said, "All right. Tell me where." The cold moved, a hand on my shoulder, not unfriendly. It steered me toward the door like it had the other night. I followed. We didn't go to the gas station. We didn't go to the alley. We didn't go to Avery's yard. We went the other direction, toward the river. The path down there is narrow, and roots show through like ribs. I watched my feet so I wouldn't slip. The water made its own sound. The town pretends it loves the river, but every summer someone dumps something in it. We stopped where a fallen tree makes a bench. I sat because that's what she wanted. A jogger passed on the higher path and didn't see me. The air was clean in a way that made me aware of my own smell. "Here?" I asked. No. A steady pressure forward. Another 50 yards. There was a culvert where water trickled from a pipe. The concrete was stained with rust, but a darker stain ran down the middle that was not rust. I crouched. I put my hand on the stain because my hand wanted to know it. It was only stone now. The river took the rest long ago. I looked up at the slope above the culvert. There were trees with scarred bark where someone had nailed signs and then torn them off. There were beer cans, old and crushed, new and shiny. There were footprints in the soft dirt, but they could have been anyone's. I stood. I said, "He brought you here first, and the cold let me know I was close. But you didn't end here," I said, and the cold rose and then fell. "Not here. Somewhere else." I turned back toward the path. The pressure moved me left. I stepped into the brush. My jeans caught on a branch. I pushed through. There was a clearing. Small. I wouldn't have seen it from the path. In the clearing, the earth was wrong. Someone had dug there and filled it in. Not deep. Animals had gone to work at the edges. I knew what was under the dirt because I already had the smell in my head. I didn't have a shovel. My hands were enough. I dug like a person who knows what he is doing, because I did. I dug until my nails bled, and the soft soil turned hard, and something white showed through, and then more white, and then I held a piece of a jaw in my hand with a missing tooth where the root had cracked. I stood with the jaw in my palm, and the culvert trickled, and the river sounded like itself, and the town went on not seeing the small clearing near its heart. I put the jaw in my bag with the jacket and the tooth, and I covered the hole with the dirt I had moved. I did not leave the ground tidy. I wanted it to look like what it was. I walked home with the bag and set it on my kitchen table. I said, Is this yours? The air said yes without a sound. Then we keep going, I said. We keep going until you lie down. The light in the room didn't change. The house didn't crack. The world did not nod or shake its head. She put her fingers on my neck again, right where it meets the shoulder, and I felt my skin understand what a promise is. 2 nights later, a second man died. He was not a man I had planned to find. He was a man who found me. He knocked on my door. I opened it. He had eyes that moved too fast and the jaw of a person who had eaten a lot of meat late at night. He said, "You, Dan?" He pushed his way in without waiting. He looked around like a thief trying to remember why he came. He wore a jacket that was not blue but had the same cheap sheen. He said, "You're asking about Crawford." I didn't say yes or no. He went on anyway. People talk. People always talk. He wiped his nose with his wrist and left a shine there. He walked to my table and looked at the bag. He put a hand on it and looked at me. He smiled without amusement. "You don't know what you're carrying," he said. "You think you do." "Who are you?" I asked. "The person you pay to mind your business," he said. He went to the fridge and opened it, and took out a beer like it was his, and twisted the cap. He didn't ask. He drank half. He said, "You're not the first to get an itch about that house." The cold in the room deepened. He rubbed his arms like the AC had kicked. He smirked. "Yeah, okay," he said to the air. He didn't leave. He sat on my couch. He slapped the cushion beside him. "Come on," he said to me. I didn't sit. He shrugged. "You knew Avery?" "I knew of him," I said. "He had a hobby," the man said. "A dedicated amateur. There were others. Clubs form. Ideas spread. People try things. That's the nice way to say it. Then a woman gets in the way of a lesson, and a landlord walks in on a mess, and a boy won't stop asking questions. The cops like easy. The easy got hard." He drank the rest of the beer and wiped his mouth with the same wrist. He looked at my pantry. He walked over and opened it. He saw the paper on the door with blue jacket. He laughed once. "God, you people," he said. He closed the pantry and faced me. "You should leave town, Dan. Not because I care. Because the thing in this house, it doesn't want you." He tapped his chest. "It wants the story. You're not the story. You're a broom." He took a step toward the door. The cold touched my neck hard enough to make me gasp. He heard it. He turned. He said, "There she is. Hello, sweetheart." He put his hand out like he wanted to shake hers. He was smiling when I crossed the room. He lifted his hand to point at me, to make a shape with his words. I hit him on the side of the head with the ceramic bowl I keep my keys in. It broke in my hand. He fell, and his skull made a sound when it met the floor that people in apartments try not to hear through walls. I hit him again before he could speak, and his breath came out of him like a bellows, and then stopped. I stood over him with both hands open. The blood pooled fast, the way warm liquid moves when nothing stops it. I looked at my hands and felt shocked at the time it took to feel shock. My mouth said, "I'm sorry," without telling me. I don't know who that was for. He had a knife in his boot. I found it. He had a card in his pocket with a name it took me a minute to connect. The name was Greer. My house smelled like iron and soap and the smoke from someone else's yard. I cleaned again. I wrapped him in my shower curtain because that's what there was. I carried him down the stairs at 2 points along the night where the world goes dull. I put him in my car and drove to the river and dragged him to a bend where the water runs low over stones. I left him there, his head on a rock, as if he had fallen asleep before taking a swim and never woke. It was a lie that would not work for long. It didn't need to. I wanted the current to touch him for a while. I wanted some part of him to travel. I went home and threw away the broken bowl pieces in the bag with my first night's clothes. I sat on the couch again and waited. She didn't touch my shoulder. She didn't sit beside me. She stood in the hall with the bathroom light off and the hall light on, and she watched me from there. She didn't need eyes to do it. I felt it the way you feel a house shift on its foundation. "We're not done," I said. "I know that." The hall air agreed. I didn't sleep. I didn't dream. I watched the wall and thought of the blue jacket on the hook and the tooth in my pocket and a man laughing into the air because he didn't believe in what it could do. I thought of Frank's cut hand and the way he had looked at me when he asked if I slept okay. I thought of the photos in Avery's freezer and how many more there were in boxes down in the evidence room and in closets and in the backs of minds that had trained themselves not to look. In the morning, if morning happened, Ortega told us the river had given up a man. People crowded the bridge. The town wanted to be close to a bad thing, so it could say it had survived it. Burke didn't come in that day. Walt took the buzzer phone off the hook. I scanned boxes with my hands steady and my eyes not seeing the paper. I went home and made coffee and poured it down the sink. I set the bag with the jacket and the jaw and the tooth on the table and looked at it like it might tell me something new. The house breathed. There is a point in any mess where you can tell yourself the story is about justice, and another point where you realize it's about compulsion. I was at the line between them, a foot on each side. She didn't care which it was. She only cared that I kept moving. That night I heard a voice for the first time since she came. It wasn't words. It was a sound like a person trying to say a word through water. It made my teeth hurt. I stood up so fast the coffee table went over. I waited. The sound came again, a little clearer. A slip of syllables that might have been garage, or Greer, or Gary. The house did not help me choose. "Say it again," I said. I closed my eyes like that would help. The sound came and I picked garage because my brain wanted not to pick Greer. I got my keys. I went downstairs. I didn't look at Frank's door. I drove to the storage garage the county rents for overflow, a long row of metal doors with numbers and no locks you could see. I didn't have a key. I had a bolt cutter I'd bought that afternoon without telling myself why. I found the unit marked with a number I had seen on a label on a box in the evidence room. I cut the lock. The clack was small and final. I rolled the door up. Inside were more boxes. Of course there were more boxes. There are always more boxes. I turned on my phone light and pointed it at the labels. Some meant nothing to me. Some meant everything. I found one that said Crawford-MISC-HOLD. I set it on the concrete and opened it. Inside was a plastic container with a cracked lid. Inside that container was a stack of photographs with white borders. I lifted the first one. I saw a woman on her knees with a bag on her head. I saw a man in a chair. I saw a boy. I saw more. The stack went deeper than my hand wanted to go. I didn't put them back. I didn't close the box. I didn't roll the door down. I stood with the photos in my hand and felt the house across town shift its weight, like it knew what I was doing. I felt her standing at my back, not close enough to touch, close enough to own the air. "This is the first half of it," I said. Maybe to her, maybe to myself. We're only in the first half. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. The dead who haven't rested don't argue. They keep moving you forward until the ground you're on ends. I took the long way to the new place. It was a ground floor unit behind a laundromat. The dryer vents blew warm lint onto the hedge. The room smelled like soap and steam. The landlord was a woman who kept her nails short and didn't ask me anything other than whether the sink drained. It did. The first night there, I slept without waking from a cold spot on my neck. I woke because a truck backed up in the alley and beeped at a steady pace. I made coffee and stood at the sink. The window looked at a brick wall painted with a faded ad for bread. It was the right kind of dull. A week passed. At work, I went through boxes stamped with dates that had nothing to do with me. Ortega asked if I was settling in. I said yes. She said good and handed me a new stack. The radio held a station for the length of a song, and then dipped into static and came back again. Normal. The demolition notice went up on the fence around the old house. Someone had spray painted a heart on the plywood, and someone else had crossed it out. I walked by on my lunch break. A backhoe sat at an angle like it had dozed off. Yellow tape ran from the porch columns to a post in the yard, then sagged. Two men in orange vests smoked by the curb and talked about ball scores. They looked through me the way workers on a time job look at anyone who isn't carrying a tool. I went back that night when the fence gate hung unlocked, and the sight lights made everything look like a set. The door to my old unit was open. The new company had stripped the place to studs. The patched wall was still there. It looked like any patch. A painter had rolled one coat over it. My hand found the seam anyway. The wood was cool. The floor no longer sloped. They had jacked it and sistered the joists. My coffee wouldn't slide here anymore. Not that it mattered. On the kitchen floor, the cabinet Frank had kicked was gone. Only a rectangle of clean plywood showed where it had been. My eye kept trying to put the shoe print back. In the main room of the old downstairs unit, a tarp covered a square cut in the floor. The tarp puffed when the night breeze moved the house. I peeled it back and looked down into the crawl space. The earth there was damp and black. A short ladder leaned against the opening. I went down. It smelled like soil and sawdust. The beam that ran along the center had old nail holes and dark watermarks that looked like cities seen from far away. A line of bricks made a low wall. Someone had stacked extra ones like they'd planned to do more, and then left. I moved the flashlight slow. A rat nest glowed in the beam, and then disappeared when the light turned away, as if the nest had been ashamed. She wasn't here. I knew what her kind of air felt like. This air had nothing in it but earth. I should have climbed back up and gone home. I didn't. There was a low form in the far corner under the stairs. It looked like a poured pad. Not new. A smooth slab the size of a door. I crouched beside it and laid my palm flat. The concrete gave back the day's heat with the patience of a rock. I stood and looked around for a sign that this was just repair work. There was none. The pad didn't hold anything up. It just sat there like a lid. I didn't have tools. There was a rusted pry bar in the pile of left-behind things under the ladder. I took it and chipped at the edge. The pry bar bit the concrete the way a dull tooth bites an apple. After a while, my wrist shook. I kept going. Chips made a ring. The ring became a line. Dust in the air made the beam look like rain frozen in place. A piece gave under the bar with a sound like a sigh. I levered it up. Under the slab was darker concrete, then a gap. Cool air rose like a person taking a breath in a cellar. I widened the opening. 3 pieces came out and stacked beside the hole like gray bread. The smell changed. It wasn't loud. It was long. A shoe lay in the space under the pad. Small, dark, the sole turned up. I pulled it free. A small sock clung to it, stiff as bark. Beneath the shoe were bones. Not many. A scatter. The pad had been a convenience, not a coffin. I took what was there. Each piece felt like I was lifting a clasp and setting it open. A short length of chain lay wound in the dirt, the kind you use on a gate. I left that. I took a button like the one I'd found before, only this one had cracked down the middle. I put everything in a contractor bag I found near the ladder. I tied it twice and carried it up. I spread a trash bag on the floor of what had been the living room and arranged the small pieces the way they wanted to sit. I didn't need the tub this time. There wasn't enough for that. I was angry, and the anger wasn't hot. It was cold and careful. I put my fingers on the planks of the floor and felt the grain. The boards had learned silence without meaning to. A flashlight swung past on the street. I packed the bones and the shoe and the button and left through the back. I went to the hill, to the same stretch of grass, and set these last pieces with the others. I pressed the dirt. When I stood, a car rolled by on the road below. Slow. Headlights cut through the trees and striped the stones. No one stopped. The next morning, tape and notices went up in a hurry. Someone had cut the lock on the fence. Someone had been inside. The foreman shouted at a man I didn't know for 10 minutes, then signed a paper and waved his hands like that made a shape in the air he liked better than the one he was in. They ripped off the roof on a Thursday. The shingles went into a bin like black leaves. The framing went next, fast, loud. Boards cried when the nails finally let go. People gathered on the sidewalk. One woman filmed from a porch. A kid sat on his bike and watched with his mouth open. The excavator's arm pressed through a wall and pulled back. Old dust became new dust. The rooms that had been rooms became air again. That night I walked past the fence and saw a figure sitting on the hood of a parked car across the street. Burke. He nodded once. I stood by him in the shadow. He smelled like bar soap and coffee. They poured a lot of concrete under there, he said, like he was talking to himself. Some of it had no point. I found some, I said. I figured, he said. They'd have found it too. Not the right way, I said. The right way is slow, he said, and often late. We watched the excavator rest its arm like a tired animal. The operator climbed down and stretched his back and lit a cigarette and looked at the house the way a person looks at a road they just drove. Burke said, "You moved, I heard." "Behind a laundromat," I said. "Good," he said. He took something from his pocket and put it in my hand without looking at me. It was the shark keychain from the evidence box, or one like it. The paint on the teeth had worn off. "You can throw that in a river for me, or keep it in a drawer," he said. "Your call." He slid off the hood and crossed the street. He didn't look for traffic. The machines glowed under the flood lamps, and his jacket looked white in that light. He spoke to the foreman. They pointed at a stack of windows, at the bin, at the ground. He didn't look back my way. I went to the bridge and dropped the keychain. It made the smallest sound a thing can make when it hits water. The river took it without changing shape. The next week the house was gone to the foundation. Men in masks and paper suits hosed down a pit. A backhoe scraped. A jackhammer rode the pad that had been the living room and shook the sidewalks and the calves of anyone standing near. I felt it in my teeth. I went to work. When I came back past, there was a square hole where the crawl space had been, and tape around it, and a sign on a stick that said, "Do not enter." The sign had a coffee ring on one corner. A man I had not seen before waited by the hole with a clipboard. He wore a bright, hard hat and a clean vest. His beard was too neat for this job. He watched the workers move like a person who counts money when it is other people's. When he saw me looking, he walked over. "You live around here?" he asked. "I did," I said. "Got any pictures of the place before they started?" he asked. "The company likes those. Makes a good before and after." "No," I said. "Not any worth using." He held my eyes for a second too long. He wasn't looking for photos. He was testing something he couldn't name. "You shouldn't be this close," he said. "I'll step back," I said. I didn't. He smirked and went to yell at a laborer about a tarp. Later I heard him on the phone saying the word schedule too many times. That night my new place behind the laundromat smelled like bleach. I lay on the couch and listened to the machines next door thrum. It felt like a big heart. I thought I heard a faint sound in the kitchen. Not a voice. A light crack. I got up. The marble I'd set on the windowsill had rolled to the edge and stopped. No one had touched it. The slope of the sill wasn't enough to move it. It sat there like it had decided on something. I set it back. It rolled a little and found a new stop. I left it. I stood by the sink and felt the air. The room was empty. I went back to the couch and slept. I started walking a different route to work, not past the site. I still got news. The records counter clerk liked to tell me things. He told me a worker had fallen and taken a week off. He told me the new company had changed names mid-permit. He told me they'd be pouring a slab on Friday, and by the time the frost came, the frame would be up. Thursday night I went anyway. The fence was still open. The square hole had been partly filled with crushed stone. A crew had left rebar in bundles near the tape. A generator idled low. The foreman's metal clipboard sat on a stack of plywood. It had the pour schedule on it and a crude map with X marks. One X was on the crawlspace corner where I had found the pad. The neat bearded man in the clean vest stood by the hole again, alone, smoking. His vest had a new logo. He watched the site the way a man watches a stove he left on. He turned when he heard me on the gravel. He smiled like it was automatic. "You take a lot of walks," he said. "I sleep better after," I said. "You used to live here," he said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. "Ever hear stories?" he asked, tasting the word. "Yes," I said. "You believe them?" he asked. "I buried parts of one," I said. He took a drag on the cigarette. His face didn't change. He flicked ash into the hole and watched it fall. "We got to get this slab in," he said. "Weather's turning." "You're pouring over the crawl space," I said. Cheaper than hauling it all out, he said. Cleaner. He pointed at his neat beard like that meant something. Cheaper than what else? I asked. He smiled again and didn't answer. He was a person who liked to hear the sound of a lid closing. He dropped the cigarette into the crushed stone and ground it out with the toe of his boot. The leather was unscuffed. Don't come back here at night, he said. It's not safe. I'll keep that in mind, I said. He stepped closer. He was taller than me by a head. His breath smelled like mint over meat. He said, You know the old owner, the name on the file. He's gone, I said. He tilted his head like we were in a seminar. Owners don't go, he said. They dilute. He walked away toward the generator and shut it off. The sudden quiet snapped like a string. He left through the open gate and didn't look back. I waited until his taillights were gone, and then I climbed down into the hole. The stone shifted under my weight and made a sound like sugar being poured. The air was damp and cooler by 10 degrees. I crouched at the corner where I'd found the pad. The ground there looked tamped. Fresh fill had been spread and rolled. I sank my fingers into it and felt the line where old dirt met new. There was a small shape half buried near the edge, too regular to be a stone. I worked it loose. A metal tag with a stamped number, like a coat check disc. I rubbed it clean and the numbers raised in my palm. 214. It meant nothing by itself. I pocketed it and climbed out. On the street, a truck idled, lights off. A figure sat inside. I couldn't see the face. I walked toward my car. The truck pulled out slow and went the other way. I noted the dent in the rear bumper and the way the license plate frame rattled. Old habits. At home, I set the tag on the table and stared at it. I thought of the evidence room and its numbers instead of names. I slept badly. In the morning, I took the tag to work and spent an hour in the old index while Ortega was upstairs in a meeting. Drawer after drawer, metal tabs with black type. I found a sequence near 214 that matched property holds under Greer's signature. 209, knife, 210, rope, 211 photos, 212, jacket, 213, personal item, 214, token, no description, release 2, CF, counter signature, illegible, CF, Cal, or Crawford family, or something else. The cardstock smelled like old gum. I put it back and closed the drawer. I stood there with my hands on the pull like I had to hold the cabinet shut or it would talk. That night I went back to the site with a shovel in my trunk and the bar I'd used before. The fence was closed but not locked. The tape in the hole had been pulled tighter. A new sign said, Concrete Friday, 7 a.m. The neat-bearded man's truck was parked around the corner, nose in, like a person who wants to look casual about leaving fast. The generator was off. The floodlights made hard shadows. I climbed down the crushed stone and went to the tamped corner and started to dig. The shovel bit and slipped and bit again. When the hole got deep enough, I used my hands. The stones scraped my skin. I didn't stop. I wanted the thing that matched the metal tag, and I didn't have a good reason. I only had the itch. At 12 inches down, the stones gave, and my fingers sank into a pocket of finer soil. I spread the hole with both hands. Something lay there, wrapped in plastic and bound with wire twisted tight with pliers, a bundle no bigger than a shoebox. The plastic had gone cloudy. I hauled it up and into my arms and climbed. My feet slid on the slope and the stones sang under me, and I got my balance back and made the edge and sat with my legs past the tape and held the bundle in my lap. My heart pounded like I'd run. I walked the bundle to my trunk and set it in and shut the lid soft. I drove the long way home, then changed my mind and drove to the bridge. I stood with the bundle on the railing for a long minute. The water moved below, patient. This did not belong to the river. I took it back down, put it in the trunk again, drove to the hill. At a picnic table near the back fence, I cut the wire and peeled the plastic. Inside was a metal box with a hinged lid and rusted clasp. I pried the clasp with a flathead from my pocket. The lid came up with a stiff pop. Inside the box were tokens like the one I'd found, a ring of them on thin wire, numbers stamped, some with letters. Beneath the ring, a small folded paper. I opened it. Names in a tidy hand. 2 columns. One was men. One was a list of dates. Some names had lines next to them. Some had nothing. It wasn't a ledger. It was a score. I put the paper back. I didn't need it. The wind shifted and the scent from the grass lifted up, damp and clean. I closed the box and carried it to a spot beside the other dirt, and used the small spade I keep in the trunk for bad shoulders, and planted it there, 6 inches down. Not deep enough to hide forever. Deep enough to be a thing you have to choose to find. When I stood, a figure leaned against the far tree. The shape was familiar because it was any man in a jacket after dark. He stepped forward, and the light from the parking lot put a stripe on his face. Burke. He had his hands in his pockets and his mouth in a line. "You keep beating me to the good parts," he said. "You want this?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not from you and not tonight," he said. "Let it sleep a bit." He walked with me to my car. He looked smaller than he did in daylight. He said, "The pour is in the morning. You done with that place?" "I'm done," I said. He believed me. He put a hand on my shoulder, not the place where she used to touch. The other side. He squeezed once and let go. The concrete trucks came with dawn, rumbling. Men in boots stood with rakes. The chute swung. Gray went in. The neat-bearded man checked the pour line and signed the sheet and smiled for someone's camera phone. By afternoon, the slab was a sheet that mirrored the new sky. A kid threw a rock and it left no mark. The men laughed at him, kind, and he ran off down the sidewalk and cut between 2 yards. The new frame went up. The building changed shape. The yard slope got cut to fit a walkway. The steps were metal. The windows large. A banner showed a picture of a couch with white cushions and a small plant on a table, and the word modern. A couple toured the place with a woman in heels, who pointed at the ceiling and said, "Open feel," and at the floor and said, "Treated oak," and at the hallway and said, "Secure," like there was a person hiding just off stage who would agree. I moved through this part like a person who has already left a party but stays to be polite. Work, sleep, eat, walk. Don't stand too long where people can ask if you are all right. Ortega gave me a stack labeled tax deeds. Walt came by with a box of old staplers and a story about a nephew who forgot his own birthday. The radio worked for an hour and then quit, and I let it. One night I walked to the river and leaned on the rail and watched a log spin in a slow eddy. I thought of the quarry. It sits out there night after night with its old water and its secrets stacked like coins no one spends. I had the sense that the surface is more honest than the bottom. Then I thought the opposite. It didn't matter which was true. Both felt true, and I was tired of choosing. When I got home, the marble had rolled off the sill and landed on the counter, and then bounced to the floor and settled under the fridge. I crouched and slid my hand under and felt for it. My fingers found dust, a bottle cap, a paper clip, and the cool, smooth circle. I brought it out and washed it, and put it on the table instead of the sill. It didn't roll. It sat like a small eye. On Friday night, the laundromat closed early, and the vents didn't roar. The whole building felt emptied of its heartbeat. I lay on the couch and listened to the quiet. It wasn't the same quiet as the old place. It didn't have its own breath. It was just the absence of machines. I slept and dreamed I was standing in the middle of a room with no walls, and someone was walking around the edge, not coming closer and not leaving. When I woke, my neck didn't hurt. The dream didn't hold on. Months thickened. The new building at the old address got a coat of paint the color of almond shells. Glass went in. A tree was planted in a square of soil with a strap around its trunk so it wouldn't lean. Couples came on Saturdays with coffee cups and looked up and nodded at each other like they knew what they were seeing. A kid in a hoodie tagged the plywood one night with a looping name, and the neat bearded man painted it out in the morning with careful brush strokes as if he was petting a dog. I stayed out of the way. I went to work. I helped Ortega find a tape from a meeting in 2002, and we both listened to two voices argue about an easement like it mattered in a fresh way. I bought new shoes. I stopped waking at night. The place inside me where pressure used to sit got used to being empty. Then one afternoon, Burke came into the basement and stood with his hands in his pockets and said, "We found something," in a voice that had no color. "Where?" I asked, though I already knew. "Quarry edge," he said. "Some of the bank slid after the freeze. We got a hand. The rest will come." He scratched his chin like he'd shaved too fast. "You don't need to go out there," he said. "I wasn't going to," I said. I meant it when I said it. By evening, I was driving the road out past the mill. I parked where the trucks park and walked the last 100 yards under the pines. They had tape and lights and a tent. Walt was there in a paper suit, sweating, carrying a box to the van. He looked smaller in the suit in a way that made me look away before I could start liking him. I stood behind the tape. The water reflected the portable flood lamps and made a smear of stars where there were none. A woman in a hard hat wrote on a board. A man knelt near the slide with a small brush and moved dirt off of something with the care you give a face. Burke came to the tape. He didn't tell me to leave. He pointed with his chin at a spot I couldn't see and said, "We'll put what we can together. The rest we'll let be." He sounded tired, past the kind of tired that sleep fixes. "You want help?" I said. "No," he said. "Not from you. Not because you can't. Because you did enough." He was right. I walked back to the car. The pines dropped needles on the hood. A rock caught in the tread of my shoe clicked on the asphalt with each step until I flicked it out with the tip of a key. A week later, a short notice ran in the paper. Remains recovered. Identity pending. Someone taped a strip of ribbon to the fence by the hill, and it fluttered until rain stuck it to the wire. I brought coffee to the bench and didn't stay. The wind cut across the top and made my eyes water, and I let that happen without telling myself what it meant. The building opened. The banner came down. A crane lifted an air unit to the roof, and people on the sidewalk stopped and pointed, and then went on with their day. A moving van pulled up and blocked the lane. A man carried a couch wrapped in plastic. A woman carried a plant in a clay pot and tried to shield it with her coat from a wind that didn't care. The door beeped when they keyed in, and the light over the entry went green. The glass swallowed them. The lobby smelled like new carpet and paint, and someone's cologne that had come along for the ride. I stood across the street a minute too long. A security guard I hadn't noticed asked if I needed anything. I said no, and walked away. At the corner, I looked back. The second floor had a wide window where my patched wall used to be. The light inside was warm. A person moved past and then moved back and set something on a table. I kept walking. At home, I cooked bad eggs and ate them anyway. I ran water in the sink and watched it whirl. I took the marble from the table and put it in my pocket. It made a small weight. I sat on the floor with my back against the cabinet and listened to the quiet. I could hear the laundromat's machines on low through the wall like a train far away, steady and not asking anything of me. I don't keep a shrine. I don't keep tokens. The photo in the drawer stays in the drawer. The word on the back is still there. The ribbon is in the ground. The jacket and cap are down in the dark, where nothing keeps its edges for long. The men who like to hold keys or wear caps or take notes in the wrong columns have the ends men like that get, which is to be turned into facts no one wants to say out loud. Sometimes at work, a file crosses my desk with a smell that takes me back to the basement at my old place. Plaster and old glue and the ghost of smoke. It never means anything now. It's just an old folder. I slide it into the scanner and it hums, and a sheet becomes a shadow on a screen, and then becomes a number and goes away. One late shift I went upstairs to take out trash and found the elevator down. The stairwell smelled like hand soap and winter coats. On the landing, a night janitor had left a cart. There was a rag on top, damp. A bucket below with water the color of weak tea. The rag dripped in a slow rhythm. I stood there and listened to it, and then kept walking. I still pass the river. I still look over the rail. There is always something drifting. Branches, a soccer ball, once a chair. Never the things that matter. The current makes sure of that. I lean and feel the breeze lift the hair on my arm, and I wait for the small shiver that used to mean someone was behind me. It doesn't come. The laundromat changes ownership. The new owner puts a plant on the counter and changes the light bulbs to the bright kind that make colors jump. He adds a vending machine that eats quarters and gives you pretzels if you hit it just right. One night he tells me about a dryer that squeals when it spins and stops squealing when it's empty, and how he can't figure that out. I tell him to check the belt. He says he did. He laughs and says it's probably haunted. I smile and pay for soap from the machine and go back to my place and fold shirts while they are still warm. If I wake at night, it's because something simple needs me. Water, air, a change in light. I don't expect cold fingers on my neck. I don't expect the pen to slide. If I say her name in the dark, it is to hear the shape of a word I don't want to forget. The room stays a room. The wall stays a wall. The air has nothing in it but itself. That feels right. I keep moving. That's the best I can do with what's left. The rest belongs to the ground and the water and the quiet spaces people walk past without looking down. The work on my side was to find what needed finding, to put hands where a wall had been, to carry what could be carried, to bury what needed ground, and then to go. I did that. I live where laundry breathes through vents, and a brick wall outside my window holds onto a faded ad for bread, and the days line up in a way a person can stand. I go to work and scan paper and come home and lock the door and sleep. The floor here is level. The coffee stays where I set it. The marble on my table doesn't roll unless I push it. That's enough.